My name is Edgardo Miranda-Rodiguez. I'm a graphic novelist, philanthropist, and writer and creator and publisher of the independent graphic novel series La Borinqueña, a series that's been around since 2016. I actually came up with this concept inspired by the economic crisis affecting Puerto Rico, and I wanted to create a project that would allow me to enter the space of pop culture to talk about the real humanitarian crisis affecting 3 million Puerto Ricanos with US citizenship. And in the era that we live in that is so dominated by superhero culture, I felt that this would possibly be the most viable project to do it. And 7 years later, we're still here. We've published 6 books already now. Our newest one is actually a spin-off from the universe that we created. And it's also allowed us a vehicle to become a very successful philanthropic project, having helped us raise close to $200,000, making us the only graphic novel series that exists that's actually dedicated to charity work in Puerto Rico. So my family was part of the massive migration of the 40s through 60s, referred to as La Mano de Obra, or the Operation Bootstrap, which was this initiative created by the United States to bring laborers from Puerto Rico into the United States. Many of them ended up in industrial urban areas like New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, even as far out as Hawaii. And my family originally came from Santurce, which is more colloquially referred to as Barrio Obrero. This was the town, the barrio in San Juan, that was founded by libertos, those Puerto Ricanos of African descent. And our family grew up in this incredibly racially diverse Puerto Rican community, and that stayed with us. So when my family came here to New York City, my uncles and aunts, they all married Afro-Puerto Ricans, and this was just kind of like a natural thing for us. And I grew up with this Puerto Rican culture in our homes, but I wouldn't visit Puerto Rico until my early teens when we moved there. And I've been connected to Puerto Rico mostly through my activism. I've been very involved in social justice work here in New York City, producing youth conferences, producing documentaries with my mentor, Iris Morales, who won an award for a documentary she produced on the Young Lords Party. So it's been a part of my life for many years, and as an entrepreneur who has his own design studio, having the opportunity to create a project that allows me to connect to Puerto Rico in a more contemporary way was, for me, an incredible opportunity that I couldn't pass up. So Marisol Rios de la Luz is a college student. She's an undergraduate student here in New York City at Columbia University. She lives with her family in Los Sures, more commonly referred to as Williamsburg, Brooklyn. She's part of what we refer to as the diaspora. She's a diaspora Rican, for example. Although there are 3 million Puerto Ricanos on the archipelago in the Caribbean, there are close to 6 million of us across the United States, more than double. And I believe that is a lot to do with this history of economic and colonialism and social issues that have brought so many of us here. And we've made homes, we've made barrios, we've renamed streets. And so the character is a reflection of that part of our Puerto Rican, our Latin identity of living in the United States. It's also an opportunity to show that we have our own narratives that exist here in the US. One of the interesting things about creating a narrative around a young woman such as herself is I'm able to, as a storyteller, connect Puerto Rico to US stories, because as Puerto Rico continues to be a colony of the United States, there are US citizens living there. So technically, anything that happens in Puerto Rico could still be considered part of this US narrative. So Marisol is an undergraduate student studying environmental sciences. She takes a semester abroad in Puerto Rico, but mostly, which is very typical amongst many Latin families that come from either working middle class families, there's a strong connection to her family. And in this case, although she's going to Puerto Rico to study, she's also going there to help out her abuela and abuelo who are running their own restaurant. As is typical of many families, they're retired, but they still find something new for themselves to do. And while she's there, she finds these mystical crystals that connect her to the Taino mysticism. The Tainos were the indigenous peoples of the Caribbean islands, and that part of our identity and culture is still alive and vibrant today. And I wanted to bring that into the graphic novels because, for the most part, graphic novels and storytelling are centered around European mythologies. They're even inspired by the Bible. I mean, Superman is literally a Moses archetype. And so, understanding that, I sought our own mythologies. As a Puerto Riqueño, what are the mythologies that are native and indigenous to my identity and culture that have never been used in this genre? So Marisol, as an undergraduate student, visits Puerto Rico, but the reality of living in a colony becomes incredibly real for her. And as the story progresses over the last 7 years, she's chosen not to return to New York City. And is a reflection of many young Puerto Ricanos who, from the diaspora, born and raised out here, are now choosing to move to Puerto Rico. I actually endearingly refer to that population as Nuevo Ricans. And it's honestly an incredible movement of many media story makers. Some of them are influencers, some of them are activists. And Marisol represents that generation of young diasporicans who are now returning to Puerto Rico, but still have a connection. And I think that's kind of like the challenge that we have, because those of us who live here always have this mentality. It comes from the Spanish phrase, ni soy de aquí, ni soy de allá. I'm not from here, and I'm from neither if I'm from there. So we find ourselves kind of like with this dual identity, where we feel connected to Puerto Rico, we feel connected to living here in the US, but we don't feel connected anywhere. So we're kind of like tethered to both places at the same time. In the first page of La Borinqueña #1, Marisol is literally saying to the reader, my name literally translates to sea and sun, rivers of light. I wonder if my parents knew what they were doing when they named me, because just before she translates her names for the reader, she's saying she composts, she rides her bike. It was very deliberate that Marisol was an environmentalist, because she's reflective of a generation of young people that are embracing a planet which may not be the same planet they're living in now in the next 10, 30 years. And scientists are saying that if we don't take serious action now, by 2030, we're going to see significant dire differences in our way of living here on the planet. So understanding that, I felt it was incredibly important that as a young person, she would be the first one in this story to articulate that and be aware of that. And that she didn't need superpowers to accentuate that. It was just something that was naturally a part of her identity, but also something that was part of being a young woman of color, because disproportionately women and people of color are directly affected by climate change. People often just see climate change in the big sweeping numbers, the amounts of tons of plastic waste that the US and Europe send to Asia, or the fluctuating weathers, or obviously the massive cataclysmic events that are happening across the planet. But there are also real personal reactions to climate change, like in the United States, the highest rates of asthma are in communities of color. Puerto Ricans especially are one of the highest affected communities, not only across the US, but even in Puerto Rico. And this is a direct effect of climate change. This is a direct effect of environmental racism. Recently, longtime activist Jane Fonda, a video of hers went viral, and she connected climate change to racism, to classism, to any kind of oppression and exploitation. Because honestly, if you look at where everything is that's messing up our planet, we're dumping our garbage in countries of color. We're putting industries in communities of color across the United States, because those are the poorest communities and they don't have the infrastructure and the resources to fight back. And so Marisol being an environmentalist was very natural. It was very important. But I didn't want her to be an environmentalist that soapboxed. I didn't want her to be an environmentalist that had page after page of her monologuing. I wanted her to be a young woman that organically in the story, you saw how she cared for the world, how she was affected. There's a scene in the second book, La Borinqueña #2, when she opens a portal and is able to see the past. That's one of her superhuman powers. Not so much a time traveler, it's almost as if her star is a pair of Google lenses that kind of like allow her to see a virtual reality. So she sees the past, and when she comes out of this state, she goes into an asthma attack. Now she has her superpowers, but she still has her asthma. And it's little things like that, or even the first few panels of the first issue of La Borinqueña when it premiered in 2016, she's helping leatherback sea turtles, or tinglares, to find the shore. That's a direct response to the rising sea levels, the disappearing coastlines. In our charity work in Puerto Rico, we support a nonprofit in Culebra. And this nonprofit has actually told us, they're called Correlations, and they work with young people to teach them how to preserve the coral reef, how to literally clean the beaches or even swim into the sea to clean and care for the coral reefs. In these conversations, they've told us that there was a time where leatherback sea turtles would migrate to the beaches, but the beach levels have risen so much that there are no beaches for the turtles to lay their eggs. And these are turtles that migrate thousands and thousands of miles. So there are ways in the story where I have organically kind of brought in this conversation, and even into a contemporary conversation with all of the privatization in Puerto Rico because of Act 60 and how so many developers are working with corrupted political leaders and elected officials to actually give them beachfront property, which is illegal. But the property off the beach is legal to sell, but the beach is not included. And it's a concept that's very foreign to a lot of developers, because here in the United States, when you buy a property, for the most part, your footprint also includes the beach. But that's not the case in Puerto Rico. All of the beaches in Puerto Rico are legally referred to as public beaches. Therefore, if a property, even if it's a small condominium or a massive multi-billion-dollar resort, if it's developed on the beach, the public still has the right to legally have access to that beach.
Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and check out more io9 videos here on YouTube.